Okay, that's always a good reminder that you hit the button. Welcome, everyone. My name is Cheryl Delk-LaGood. I'm the Executive Director for EnglishUSA, and we're super excited today to have one of our valued associates, National Geographic Learning, present a little bit about their new test. So I'd like to introduce Caitlin Thomas, who is the Senior Manager Product Marketer. I hope I got that right. Who will be sharing some updates today, and also Joy McFarlane, who previously served on the EnglishUSA board. She'll be in the background, but also answering questions in the chat. Caitlin has a plan for about 40 minutes or so, followed by questions. So I'm gonna back away and introduce and have Caitlin come on in.
Right. Thanks, Cheryl. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. As Cheryl mentioned, my name is Caitlin Thomas, and I am part of the National Geographic Learning Global Product Marketing team. I'm coming to you today just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. Happy to be part of the NGL team for just over 16 years now. It's been a delight. And I look forward today to talk to you about the National Geographic Learning Online Placement Test. And to that end, I will share my screen and we can get started. Okay, so let's go on a journey together. Our English journey includes the teachers, educators, and assessment coordinators as they support their learners on their English language learning journey. And at National Geographic Learning, we prepare learners to achieve real-world success in English. And we know and understand that real-world success looks and feels a lot different for different learners. Students' why changes and it varies, and they're all valid, and we have the materials as well as the assessment support to help teachers and their students on that assessment journey. And those journeys are individualized, and they start with reliable placement all the way to personalized success. And we make programs that feature content that reflects the real world authentically. In our learning programs, students experience the world through ideas and photography and video from National Geographic. And there's no difference, as you will see in our test, that who we are, what we do, and our mission is reflected in the National Geographic Learning Online Placement Test. The sense of the world and everything in it, and the world from not just English-speaking countries, but all countries in the world where English is spoken. And that authenticity shines through in the test, as you will see. So what is it? What is this online placement test? Well, it provides an auto-scored adaptive placement test, and it's geared at learners ages 15 and over. It recommends placement into one of 14 bands correlated to the Common European Framework of Reference. And those bands range from pre-A1 to C1. Our test assesses reading, listening, and use of language, also known as grammar. And it also auto-collects speaking samples. And those speaking samples, or at least one of those speaking samples, are prompted by National Geographic photography, which we'll take a look at in a moment. Our test also delivers a one-page score report, and we'll take a look at this score report, but I hope you'll notice that it was informed by real user testing and provides the level of detail at the language skill and sub-skill profile to make it useful for placement. Talk a little bit more about that. Now, ahead of our launch, our online placement test underwent 2 rounds of rigorous global user testing in over 30 countries. And during development of the test, And really throughout this user testing phase, we collaborated with a world-class assessment expert called LT123. And we were looking for data at this phase. And we were looking to really answer two main questions. Was the content of the testing questions, was it fair, non-biased? And did it elicit the language needed for accurate and reliable placement? So that's sort of a long first question, but that's the first question we were looking to get at. And number two, was the placement algorithm, sort of under the hood functionality of the test, was it reliably placing learners into one of those 14 levels correlated to the CEFR? So this work was instrumental ahead of the launch, and it helped to create the fair, valid, and reliable test that we have today. And we did make some adjustments based on our findings at this stage to both the content of the questions and the functionality. And these minor tweaks, we feel, really help to deliver the accurate test that you have at your disposal now. And in this, addition to this sort of data collection, we also got some great sort of that qualitative data in the form of testimonials from the educators that we worked with around the world. I liked this one from Moitz, and this is out of an educator in Oman. And this educator really hit on this idea of the manageable, bite-sized test items, which I liked. And it makes the test feel appealing and like a formative task rather than assessment or a higher stakes assessment, which I thought was a nice piece of feedback. This educator here out of the Ukraine, I thought had a really nice kind of piece of feedback that really to me boils down to my students liked it. They actually liked taking the test. And we know right now that the environment, the test taking environment looks and feels a lot different right now. Whereas many tests were proctored, and this test can absolutely be delivered in a proctored face-to-face environment. We know that exclusively during the online user testing phase, it was all done virtual. And so having a test that has content which is real and engaging, and students can really see how it's relevant, it helps in persistence and completion of that test, which is helpful in any environment, but even more so if you can picture your learner sitting at home or in their library attempting to take a test. So having that content, that engaging content, is very, very helpful in the test-taking environment as well. So to this end, I'd like to actually switch over to the live environment and take you through a little bit of the look and feel of the test. Our test is delivered in our learning management system, and this is a look at the demo of the test. And I think that what you'll notice is that the testing environment here has a very intuitive and easy to use interface. You are simply advancing from testing. We have navigation here, which actually shows students how they are progressing along. And what you will notice, I have a sample here from the reading, and you will notice real world images, real world content. And of course, in the actual test taking environment, you will not see the level of CEFR correlation here at the bottom, but I did put it here just for our kind of review. You're also going to notice our brand. We have our brand and our values and our mission. So in addition to accessing the real and reliable language that is needed for assessment, your students are going to be engaging with content that talks about the environment, that talks about real global issues. This is actually a radio interview about a village that has banned single-use plastics. And they're asked, the students are asked to listen to an excerpt. This is at the B2 level, about 50 seconds, and then get at the opinion of the interviewee. So it is actually a nice marriage of language as well as content. And this here is an example at the B2 level of the use of language. And again, you'll see our brand shined through. And in order to to protect our planet, countries should, and then you have the selections here, and you will notice that it really has to, students at this B2 level do have to have a mastery of that grammar. There are some distractors here at the B2 level to make it a more dynamic and a test that really assesses students' application of that grammar in a real world setting. After students move through 3 sections that assess reading, listening, and use of language, they are prompted to record 3 speaking samples. Now, the test concludes with the requirement of these speaking samples. They are auto-collected, and each of them are available to the instructor to listen to as an option. It is not necessary. The test will place or recommend placement into a level based on reading, listening, and use of language. However, we know that placement does require the intervention or interaction of humans. And these speaking samples really are necessary to place those learners who are at the cusp of levels, who are at the very top or at the very bottom of a level. And so prompting students to give a personal introduction about themselves, or prompting a student to talk about their reasons for learning English, or describing a photo. And all of the photos that are used in our tests are National Geographic photography. And they're also really a range of richness. So if you look at a photograph like this, you can really see how a student at the A2 level could simply say ice cream shop, or this is a student buying ice cream, to a student at the upper level who could get into the complexity of the different types of ice cream, how many people are there, that the child looks happy. There's a richness to the photography that allows students to demonstrate mastery of language, that allows the assessment coordinators or educators to more appropriately recommend placement in conjunction with their results on the placement test itself. And again, those speaking samples are automatically generated and available to learners in the learning management system. I'm going to pause there for just a moment because before we get to the language skill profile, I think it would be great to just take a moment and answer any questions about the test itself before we kind of go on and talk a little bit about what happens after students take the test. Are there any questions at this stage? And feel free to come off mute if you prefer. Give you a moment. Okay. Seems like people are well informed. Oh, I just heard something.
People are putting on cameras and looking at us and showing us their faces. I see
Well,
Marcel, I see Kelly.
I have a question.
Hi.
Hey, Marcel.
Hello, everybody. We have now fully operationalized online placement testing prior to arrival. And so my question is, and I'm sorry if I missed this because I jumped on a few minutes late. You maybe just share a little bit more about the process for the test taker itself in terms of security and how, so right now we usually proctor our tests in a Zoom environment. And so I'm wondering, can students take this test on their own, or should it be proctored? What type of security protocols are put in place to ensure that, you know, we're getting the most reliable and valid test of a student's proficiency?
I think that's a great question. First, In terms of the guidelines that we have, I'm going to just actually go here, OPT teacher. I'm going to just switch over to the supervision guidelines. We were going to take a quick look at this, but we have very comprehensive supervision guidelines where we recommend preparation for the students, as well as in-person proctoring, as well as the type of proctoring that would happen in a virtual environment. So we do make those recommendations. With respect to security, there is not the cloud-based or retina scan sort of security opportunity, but we do know that with a placement test, and we do not consider this to be a high stakes placement. This is a language proficiency gauge. That this type of approach seems to be pretty straightforward for the institutions that we are supporting at this stage.
Caitlin, I know the team has also spoken about how those voice samples can also be used in that area as well.
Yeah,
correct?
the voice samples are another way to really ensure that the human who took the test is in fact the human who is sitting before you in your class. And that is the way in which, if you do have the ability to use those auto-collected speaking samples, it's certainly a great way to use them in addition to placement.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Kelly, did you also have a question? Okay.
No more questions on that front? Okay, moving along then. Now, we talked a bit about the what is delivered after the student takes the test. And as I mentioned, this was developed in conjunction with our partners worldwide to deliver a score report with a language skill profile for each test taker. Now, we know that that the report, sort of a rolled up summary report in a CSV or an Excel file, which we absolutely provide with this information, is what would be needed at a very large scale institutional level to place a large number of students at scale. However, having this personalized language skill profile, Marcel, gets at a little bit too of that security level, because it does break down by overall SEFRA level with a narrative, and then it does get into the language skill profile for each student as well. So in terms of really pinpointing at that granular level as correlated to the CEFR, we have a lot more information that is available to that educator. And in terms of a use case, how we do see this being used now at the institutions who are implementing this, again, assessment coordinators placing large number of students will typically use that larger Excel document. But teachers who are coming into their courses with 20, 25 students will actually have this kind of diagnostic information of the folks who are sitting in their rooms, in their classrooms, to really get a sense of early lesson planning. And also, I love this idea of being able to hop on to a learning management system and listen to the reasons for the students, the reasons why your students are learning English. It provides this nice insight into the people who are in the classroom for that teacher and allows them to have a lot more information ahead of the start of courses. Any questions or comments there? Okay, great. Now, again, we have actually used this. This is, we've rolled out this online placement test in institutions worldwide, and we've received some nice feedback so far. This is with a group of language schools in Florida who is using one of our course books and really talks about the need for the placement test, which I think which I think is probably well known to the folks on this call, but it's worth mentioning. Having reliable placement, of course, it sets off the year or the semester in a really solid and grounded way. In terms of administration level, we're not moving students from course A to course B, or a flurry of movement up and down. And we know that that can be very, very difficult for the administrators of any type of institution. For the learner, it is also, it's not the most encouraging experience to be moved or shifted to another course. And we know that. Also from the administrative point of view, we know that getting that accurate number, ordering the appropriate and accurate number of course materials based on those results is of highest priority. And third, which I think this high standards of quality gets at, for most institutions, this will be the first blush that a student has with your institution. And it's nice if it can coincide with the course materials that you are offering, or provides a sense of the core values of your institution in terms of having this global, kind of a global feel to your program, and also relevant and relatable language that keeps students engaged. So those are the real sort of the why behind what I think this testimonial gets at for the teachers and learners. In addition to the sort of packaging that our complete program offers, we do offer pathways into our National Geographic Learning programs in the form of placement guides, which are found on our companion website, which we'll look at in just a minute. So again, these are correlated or guided into our programs for academic learners, upper secondary learners, and our young adult and adult integrated skills programs. And that pathway looks a little something like this. What I'd like to draw your attention to is that for each course, we also give, or the editorial team, the content team, has given some factors by which these placement guidelines are created, which I think is important to understand from an institutional perspective. And it will also offer this audio icon here. This prompts, if a student places into one of these levels here, as noted, this is a sort of a trigger for the institution to say, you know what, if a student places at this level here, this A2.1 level, it is recommended that we listen to their audio sample for the most accurate placement. So we do give those little triggers or speed bumps for the institution as well. And let's talk about a little bit more about what we offer in terms of support. This is a quick look at our National Geographic Learning online placement test companion site, which provides everything that you would need to know about the test. That includes frequently asked questions, which I hope you will have some at the end of this discussion here. Those supervision guidelines that Marcel will be interested in downloading after this presentation. An optional interview, which does provide on-level interview questions if you decide to do an in-person interview with your learners, as well as a very in-depth guide for institutions who are administering this test. So while this is a more sort of logistical supervision guideline, this offers more in-depth best practices and recommendations based on the content of the test. Questions or comments on that before I show you a little bit more of what the site has to offer? I'm looking at the chat box here as well. Okay. Test design and validation. I mentioned at the top of this presentation that we worked with an assessment expert called LT123. They have provided a very in-depth look at the design of the test, where I have a an answer that I have from them about how the test works with respect to the functionality, which I could share if anybody's interested. But it really does get down to the very nitty gritty of how the 3 phases of that adaptive online tool works and functions. And it also has a comprehensive validation report. I will give you a heads up that this validation report is quite comprehensive in terms of the length, but does give a really good look at the process by which we did the 2 phases of global testing and what those results yielded. But I also asked for a high-level summary for folks like me who would like to read the highlights of that in 1 page. So you will see both a high-level executive summary as well as a more comprehensive validation report for your reading pleasure if you have some time. Question on that. We got a lot of questions from our folks who we did the user testing phase with. How should we be evaluating the speaking responses? What should I be listening for? Are there particular words, phrases, vocabulary terms that it can trigger to help me place? And so again, we collaborated with our team to create a rubric for evaluating these speaking responses. We have an annotated score report that digs a little bit deeper at that score report with explanations as to what you will find at each of those stages. And we also have the achievement descriptors, which dig into the leveling as it relates to the CEFR. And I'd be happy to share those achievement descriptors if folks are interested at the end of the presentation. And last but not least, when you click on this course placement guidelines, you will see all of the placement guidelines that we have into our National Geographic Learning programs. I'm going to pause and let's see if there is any questions in the chat.
Do you see the one question, Caitlin, this is Cheryl. Curious why writing isn't included in the placement tests. Is the idea that language use gives enough data on this skill?
And that is exactly right. I actually have a frequently asked question for that, Misty, but we decided to go with the 3 reading, or excuse me, the use of language, listening, because we found that these 3 sub-skills provide accurate placement. And part of what we wanted to do is these 3 sub-skills provide accurate placement into the 14 CEFR bands. We also needed to meet this sweet spot between 30 and 60 minutes to complete. And we wanted to have that, it's really 2 things. We wanted to hit that sweet spot of 30 to 60 minutes to complete. And we also felt that in reviewing the auto-correcting of what writing prompts provide, we were not impressed, to be perfectly honest, with the auto writing correcting tools as it relates to language proficiency. We did not feel that that was an accurate show of language proficiency and how writing, auto-correcting writing would work. So we opted not to have that in to be able to have those accurate placements for those reading, listening, and use of language. And again, around test design in that validation report, we have a lot more information around the research behind using those 3 sub-skills and how it relates to placement. Another point, couple of points I'd like to mention. Our placement test offers the option of a mobile or desktop experience. And it takes an average of 30 to 60 minutes to complete, as I mentioned. Recommends pathways into our programs if you choose, and auto collects speaking samples and delivers that 1-page score report. While you guys are thinking about questions, as I'm just at time, I'd like you to think a little bit about some questions, as well as I'd like you to to urge you all to request a demonstration of this test. It's an automatic request, and you can receive your credentials to hop online to our LMS and take a demonstration version of the test. And I do want to stress this is a demo version in terms of safety and security. None of these questions that you will encounter on this demo will appear in the actual test. So that is for security purposes, but it will certainly demonstrate the look and feel of the test. We have not talked about pricing. Well, there it is. Each, $7 here in the US for each test taker. Joy, anything to add before we get to some frequently asked questions?
No, Caitlin, would you like me to put that demo link right in the chat for everybody?
Sure.
All right, I will pop that in for everybody.
And I find that after working with many institutions, I get a certain amount of questions. And I just kind of wanted to pull up these frequently asked questions. The number one, I've actually ranked these in order by which I received them. How does it work? So this is a summary of how this test works as provided by our assessment experts. I think the first point, though, is really the one to hit home. After an initial set of questions on vocab and grammar, students are then routed into one of two modules in the second stage. And at the second point, the test continues to adapt even after that first phase. So the question that this really gets at is, if a student, in some tests, if a student were to answer the first 5 or 6 questions, they were sort of bucketed or dumped into a complete level or route, and that was it for the remainder of the test. So please note that this test continues to adapt and adjust based on performance, and that is what allows those skills forms. Questions on how it works? How long does it take to complete? I mentioned that. But what I didn't get at is that the test is 40 questions. This pulls from a very, very large database, and it takes an average of 30 to 60 minutes to complete. But just to note, there is this range because, as you may guess, students who are placing at the higher levels will have longer listening and longer readings. So students who are at those higher levels, you're going to see longer time on test. Another question I get a lot, again, even though we've kind of talked a lot about speaking, I still usually get this. Does it assess speaking? It is not directly assessed in the test, but students are required to complete these recorded tests, these recorded tasks, and they're available in the LMS. And guidance on how to carry out optional face-to-face interviews are on the companion site, as well as guidance on how to evaluate those requests or those tasks that you collect. I also get this. Yes, please.
Sorry to interrupt. Just could you go back to the question regarding the speaking piece? Sure. So I presume this is a recorded sample, but do we get to see the individual speaking on camera, or we just get the audio file?
It's an audio file.
Okay.
It is an audio file. Yep, good question though. This is another question. We talked a bit about descriptors, but I do kind of how do programs with fewer than 14 ability levels take advantage of a finely leveled system. So this is really talking about how students are placed within a pathway into our programs. And again, all of this information will always be on our placement guidelines. So you will have this descriptor information for all of our programs in the placement guides. And that is all the information I have for you today. Right at, ended about 5 minutes ahead of time, which is fine. Nobody ever complained for having a little bit of extra time at the end. I'm going to stop sharing and allow for any questions or comments. All right. Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate being invited to the conference.
We appreciate seeing you and hope to see you in person sometime soon too.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
I'll just wait 10 more seconds or so. I'm going to turn the recording off and then just make a few announcements.
Hi, Caitlin. I do have one more question, and I may have missed this earlier in the chat. Oh, I think I just found it, the online placement test link in the chat. So sorry for taking your time.
No problem, Katie.
You did not take any time. It is just fine. Right.